Okay, welcome to Theories of Personality. Today we're going to be talking about Erich Fromm's theory of personality. I believe his theory is not in the book, so I have a handout. So it doesn't say chapter or anything. It's a handout. It's online. It's a PDF where you can find the reading for this chapter. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started talking about Fromm. He is still considered a neo-Freudian, someone who lived around the time of Freud, knew him, and then proposed his own theory later on. Interestingly enough, he was Karen Horney's lover for a while. So he was involved with her, and I think you'll see some of Karen Horney's influence on his theory a bit. He never gave her credit for anything, but you see some influence there on his theory that is similar to Karen Horney's theory. But I think his theory is very different and very interesting. So let's talk about it. Okay, the stuff that he talked about, I think, is very relevant to what we're going through today. Okay, so for Fromm, it was all about his theory. What really drives things is this issue of basically freedom or security. Okay, that's the basic human dilemma: freedom or security. In other words, okay, what do you want? Do you want freedom? Okay, and the ability to do whatever you want, go wherever you want. Okay, do you want that? You want freedom, right? Or do you want security? Do you want to feel safe? According to Fromm, that is the basic human dilemma. A dilemma is something that's a problem that we don't have a good solution to, right? In other words, if you want freedom, you must give up some security. If you want total freedom, you have no security. If you want total security, you will have no freedom. That's what Fromm believed. And there is some truth to that, right? Like, if you want total freedom, that means that basically you can do whatever you want, say whatever you want, whenever you want. The government can't tell you what to do, right? You don't have to follow any rules or any laws or anything. But it also means you have no security. Okay? You have total freedom from government, from rule, from order. No one is there to protect you. Okay? You are not going to have security. You have to protect yourself pretty much. Okay? So you're not going to have government to protect you. Now, if you want instead total security, I'm talking about the extremes here. If you want total security, then you will have no freedom. How can you be perfectly secure? Well, by being locked up in a cell where no one can touch you, no one can get to you. That is total security. And if you want to live in a country where you're very secure, you have complete freedom from harm, what that means is there's going to be a lot of rules, a lot of order, a lot of government. That means you're going to have guards at every corner watching everybody, cameras watching you at all time, inside your house, outside your home, right? People watching what you are looking at and what you are reading on the internet. By the way, we do have that happening right now. Okay, remember, I forget what it was called, the Patriot Act or something like that after 9/11 attacks. Yeah, there were some laws changed, and there's spying on everybody now online. Supposedly they stopped that. That was unlawful, and they're not doing it. But all they do when they find something's unlawful is they tweak the law a little bit, and then they continue doing what they're doing. Okay, so that's the thing. If you want total security, that means you have no freedom. That means you can't do whatever you want. They're watching you all the time. And if you do something they don't like, they're going to bust you. They're not just protecting you. They're also going to prosecute you, okay, when you do something wrong, because security is for everyone. You're basically living in a place like North Korea where there are guards everywhere and people are not free. So in order to have freedom, you need to give up some security. Maybe you don't want total freedom. You want a little bit of both, right? You want some freedom, some security. But that is the basic human dilemma, according to Fromm, okay? You can't have one completely or the other. They are in opposition of each other. And we can talk about this after the lecture is over, if you agree with this. This also gets to the issue about, freedom versus isolation, right? As human societies develop and achieve greater freedom, according to Fromm, we have also become more lonely and isolated. Okay, as we become more free, we can, and we can think what we want, do what we want, right? When we want, we have also to some extent, according to Fromm, lost our way. We have become lonely and isolated. We no longer know who we are. We have too many choices, too much freedom. Okay? You lose people along the way, right? You go where you want, do what you want. It really means that you're lonely and isolated. You don't stay in one place. You don't belong to anybody. You have total freedom. So we have become lonely as a society, according to Fromm. As we have achieved more freedom, we have become lonely. Okay? We have become alienated from nature, right? Because of our imagination, our intelligence, right? Our learning. We have transcended. We've gone beyond nature. And we feel homeless, isolated. Let me explain that, right? So we have built these societies, right? We live in buildings now. We live in houses. We live in these communities, right? Where there's a lot of people. We have also created the internet and computers and all these things. We've gone beyond nature. But at the same time, we have lost our true home. We belong to nature, according to Fromm. We are a part of nature, but we have transcended that. We've gone beyond that, and now we are homeless. We've created artificial worlds for ourselves. We have become isolated, right? We're no longer as connected to nature. We're isolated, and we actually have become more lonely. We are more lonely now than ever. Right? I know we have the internet, we have Facebook, we have all these things, and Twitter, all these social networking sites. And you might have all these hundreds of friends or even thousands of friends, but in reality, you are lonely, you're isolated. Those are not real friends. We live in an artificial world, artificial society, and it's becoming more and more that way as we transcend nature and we go beyond nature. And if you watch the movie The Matrix, right? Hopefully it doesn't come to that we become so isolated from nature and become so much a part of it that we end up living in pods connected to the internet and living only in our minds, which means we become truly isolated and are no longer connected to anyone or anything. We've become disconnected from nature, and we're becoming more disconnected from society. I mean, not from society, become more disconnected from nature and becoming more disconnected from others as we achieve more intelligence, more imagination, as we grow as a society and we develop. Okay, let's keep going. More about this, more about alienation from nature. Alienation, we become a part of it, right? We become isolated, right? So for early people, it was not that way. Early people cope with these feelings of alienation, feelings of feeling separate, of feeling apart, by identifying with tribes and clans. Early people lived out there in nature. They formed groups, but they were, formed a part of a tribe, a part of a clan, right? But they were small groups, mostly made up of family and relatives and things like that. That's how they cope with their feelings of isolation. Because they lived in nature, so they were more connected, but at the same time, they have, they are becoming a part of it as they conquer nature and develop their weapons, develop their societies. They cope with this by developing tribes and clans, but becoming more connected to each other in these groups, in these societies. And they were usually small groups, small tribal groups, right? They attained belonging, acceptance, and security through conforming to customs and rules, right? They developed these customs, these rules, where, basically where they dress a certain way, sing a certain way. They had their songs, they had their stories, right? These are all their customs, their rituals, their rules, right? Hierarchies, men were usually the hunters, the protectors, and women were the ones who basically took care of the children and maybe gathered, things, like nuts and fruit. They're the ones who stuck around, where men went out, did the hunting and did the protecting. But they formed these rules, these customs, this societies, early societies, and this made them feel more secure, less isolated, okay? Because as you do become, as you do attain more freedom, right, you become more isolated, and when you're more isolated, you're less secure. So this is the same thing of basically freedom versus security, right? You can have a lot of freedom, but it means you're more isolated and less secure. So early people, they basically held on to each other, developed tribes and clans, right? Developed rules and customs that affect how they dress, how they look, the stories they pass down, how they sing, all these things, right, that made them feel more secure. It's basically by clinging to each other. They also sought to reestablish their link with nature, right? Even though they become somewhat a part of it, not as much of it as we are today, but they tried to continue to that link with nature, right? They worship natural objects. They worship things like the sun, the moon, fire, plants, animals, right? There was the sun god, the moon god, right? Or whatever it is. You know, they believed in gods that took the form of animals, or that spirit animals, or whatever it is. You know, and this is their way basically of staying connected to nature. Nowadays, of course, we don't believe in that anymore. We become even more separated. But these early people were a bit more connected with nature, with their customs, their gods, their beliefs, but they were also becoming a part of it as they were forming their groups and tribes, right? As they're becoming more isolated, right? It's scary to have all that freedom, right? You know, to be out there all by yourself, right? You can get eaten, you can get attacked, right? So you form these clans, these groups where you feel protected and develop these rules, this order, so to speak, the beginning of society. Try to maintain that link, right? By believing in, you know, in spirits and gods and things like that that have to do with nature. And that's the way the early tribal groups were, okay? But yes, they've become, they are themselves becoming alienated from nature as they become less dependent on it, okay? But they were still very dependent back then. Each generation, according to Fromm, has moved further from the group, further away from the group, and more toward increasing individuality, independence, and freedom. If you think about it, we started out as being very group-oriented because we needed it for protection. If you were by yourself early on, you know, you weren't a part of those tribal groups, you weren't going to survive. You'd probably get eaten by an animal, or if you didn't get eaten by an animal, let's say you were good at hunting and good at protecting yourself, then you would probably get killed off by another clan or another group, because anyone who was an outsider was seen as a threat back then. And if you weren't part of a group, you were vulnerable and you were probably going to get killed off one way or another. Okay, so we formed these groups, right? And we are very group oriented at the beginning. And, you know, some societies, some countries are still very group oriented, more collectivist, right? But here in the US and in Europe, in Australia, basically the white Western world has become more and more individualistic all the time. It's all about freedom here, of individualism, right? Independence, all that stuff. That's what we believe in. But Fromm is saying that each generation in the past moved further away from the group and more toward individuality. We become more individualistic as we move along. Okay, the Middle Ages, according to Fromm, was the last era of stability, the last period of time that provided stability for people. And what he means by that is that basically people knew where they belonged. They knew their place. They were still connected. After that, we got the Renaissance, and that disrupted everything and increased individuality. But the Middle Ages was the last era of stability, according to Fromm. There was a feudal system, provided no individual freedom. You were born into a certain caste. You know, if you were born into the nobility, right? You were lucky, good for you, right? You were going to have everything, a lot of wealth, a lot of power, and you were taken care of, right? If you were born into, you know, the peasant class, it means you had no rights, you had no wealth, you had no land, you had almost nothing. And believe it or not, these people, you know, pretty much the only thing they had was the clothes on their back. That's pretty much it. They were pretty much slaves. If they wanted any, you know, to survive, they had to work for others, work other people's lands. Now, they had nothing. Some of them had so little, actually, that they didn't even have clothes, believe it or not. They were naked. That was the feudal system. You were born into a family of knights and you were male, you were going to be a knight. If you were born into a family of blacksmiths, you were going to be a blacksmith. If you were born a woman, well, you knew what you were going to do. You were going to be a mother and you were going to raise the kids, listen to your husband. You had no power, you had no freedom. That's the way the Middle Ages were. It was very stable, right? You knew where you belonged. You knew who you were, but you had no freedom. Okay. Like I said, people were born and remained in the same class. There was no upward mobility. This thing that we have here in the US, by the way, it's upward mobility is still very hard today, and very hard harder in other countries, or even impossible in some countries. But we do have upward mobility here in the US, but it's very, very hard still. Most people who are born poor here stay poor, right? Some people do move up to middle class and upper class. At least there's a chance here. But back then, there was no chance. You were born into a certain class, that's where you stayed. You were born a peasant, you were going to stay a peasant. You're born as nobility, you were going to stay as a noble, okay? No geographic or social mobility either, right? No geographic mobility. I mean, people were born and they lived and died within a few miles, okay? They really didn't go anywhere. There were no cars. There were no airplanes, no trains, okay? Most people didn't own a horse. Maybe only the nobles maybe could afford a horse, okay? But you didn't have that. You didn't wander very far. And if you did wander too far, you probably might get killed. So no real geographic mobility, okay? No social mobility either. Like I said, you couldn't move up the hierarchy. There's no choice over your customs, your occupation, your dress. No choice over, what you were going to believe, okay? It's like you believe in God, and if you didn't, they would kill you. Or whatever they believe, whatever their beliefs were, whatever they were. Occupation, right? You had no choice. Like I said, born into a family of blacksmiths, you're a male, you're going to be a blacksmith. If you're a woman, you had absolutely no choice whatsoever. You were just going to be a mother, and you were just going to bring up the children and satisfy your husband or whoever your partner was. This thing about marriage didn't always exist, by the way. No choice about how you're going to dress. Nobility dresses a certain way, knights a different way. Poor people in rags, basically, and some of them were even naked. No choice about that. No freedom, no choice, okay? But you had a lot of security. And by security, in the sense of, you know who you are, you know where you belong, okay? You know what to believe, okay? There was no doubt where you belong, who you belong to. You had a lot of security, okay? Now, I don't know about the security about, that freedom from harm, because if you were noble, a knight or something like that, you had a lot of security, okay? If you were poor, I'm not sure about the security about freedom from harm. You could easily be killed. But you had security in the sense of you knew who you were, you knew where you belonged. You knew what to believe. You had no choice about it. That was the Middle Ages, according to Fromm. There really wasn't any freedom, but there was a lot of security. At least one form of security. The Renaissance, the Reformation. The Renaissance was a period of basically a lot of scientific advancements. A lot of things were learned. There were advances in art, in science, and literature. Great advancements that challenged the order of things. They challenged the beliefs, right? Challenged the belief about whether we're really the center of the universe. That's one thing. About whether the church really is the ultimate say as to what reality is and what knowledge is. Science, the scientific revolution, the Renaissance, the empiricism, advances in art and music and science and all those things are really disrupting things. Things were questioned, right? It destroyed the stability and security by increasing personal freedom. So no longer was the church the ultimate authority in things. Most people still believed in God, but do you really have to go to church? Do you really, are we really the center of the universe? Is man, and back then it was man, is man really the most important, right? Are we the only ones here? People really started questioning things, right? Before this, by the way, music, art, and science, it was all basically controlled by the religious people, the church. Those that were the religious leaders, they were very wealthy, and they controlled vast amounts of land and wealth, and they had lots of power. And they determined what knowledge was. They determined a lot of things, but science questioned all those things. And and that increased, personal freedom. That started to disrupt things. Social ties that provide a sense of belonging and security were disrupted. Now, who are we? Where do we belong? What should we do with ourselves? Do we really just have to do as we're told, so to speak? This resulted in, according to Fromm, in feelings of insecurity. Who am I? Where do I belong? What do I do with myself? Feelings of insignificance. Am I really just one person, right? out of, you know, this vast amount, so to speak? Or are we just one planet out of millions or billions out there? We're insignificant we're one little speck, right? Doubts about the meaning of life. Is there even a God? You know, are we important? Do we matter? Do we have free will? All these things, right? Everything was questioned. I will tell you that this increased freedom was probably the case more for the upper classes. I think the upper classes always had freedom, and more for the people who were, you know, the nobility, right? The upper classes, so to speak. There was really two classes. There were the nobility, the rich people, and then the poor people. There wasn't really much of a middle class. Okay, I think they have had an increase in freedom, but not so much the other people. Poverty really keeps you enslaved. Okay, yeah, there were, at least for the nobility, there was an increase in freedom as far as, you know, that they can now challenge the church, challenge the authority. Some people basically broke away from the church and established other religions. Or, you know, the whole thing about Protestantism was basically, you know, I think it was Henry VIII who basically disagreed with the church and broke away and say, you know, I'm starting my new, movement, so to speak, or new religion over here, aside from Catholicism. I don't know, I'm not an expert on the history, but there's a lot of stuff like that that was going on. And, you know, I lost my train of thought earlier, but yes, early on, like I said, the church controlled everything. It controlled all the wealth, most of the land, because, and by the way, the nobility, the king and queen and stuff like that, they were considered to be there, placed there by God. They were like gods, okay? But I'm losing my train of thought again. Yes, but even music and art was for the pleasure of the church. Much art back then, if you see it, it's art where, you know, where it's about, you know, God and the angels and demons. I mean, everything had a religious theme to it. Music was made to please God and to please the religious leaders. That was the whole motivation for things. The Renaissance destroyed all that, and now knowledge, freedom, and music and art and science could be for other things. It really started to change things. Okay, and you see the changes, right? And what it led to. It basically disrupted everything. But again, I will tell you, this is a very biased way of looking at things. This is basically Europe and white people, basically. Okay, there's whole another part of the world. The vast part of the world, the majority of the part is not this. It's not the Renaissance, not the Reformation, right? But this is what was happening there. Okay, let's keep going. By the way, today, just to bring it up to today, today we have, of course, increasing freedom and individuality. But like I said before, you know, before I get into this, we've lost our way, so to speak, right? According to Fromm, like I said before, we're lonely, we're isolated, right? We have so much freedom now, so much individuality. And I will say that, yes, that is from the perspective of this culture, this country, right? Because in other parts of the world, they don't really have that much freedom, okay? They're more collective. It's very individualistic here. You can decide what to wear, how to talk, right? What to believe, you know, where to live as long as you can afford it, right? You have a lot of freedom, supposedly. But at the same time, and especially nowadays think about like technology. I know I'm not getting to this yet, but I'm telling you more. Think about technology, right? We have smartphones, right? What has this done for us? It has increased our individualities, right? With these smartphones now, we have our own little world in the palm of our hands, right? Our music, our movies, we no longer have to share, right? We don't have to watch TV on the big screen. We can watch it on our tablet and our smartphone, right? We have our Facebook, our Twitter, right? Our followers there, our friends, right? All in the palm of our hands. We have complete individuality, it seems, in the smartphone, okay? But at the same time, as Fromm said, we are isolated. We've grown apart from others. We don't have real friends anymore. If you just live online, especially, right? We're isolated. We're lonely. We're lost. We don't know what to think anymore. We don't know what to believe. We're miserable and lonely. We really are. Think about it, right? If you're in college, why are you in college? You want to find out what, who you are and what to do with yourself, right? Hundreds of years ago, or even thousands of years ago, you didn't need to do that. There was no such thing. There was no doubt about that. But now that you have so many choices, now you don't know what to do. That is what Fromm is saying. We're lonely, we're isolated because of all this freedom. And at the same time, we are vulnerable. Okay? With more freedom means that anybody can just pick us off. You're walking around out there, somebody could just shoot you and kill you. Right? That's what it means to live in a free society. You can do what you want, so to speak, go where you want, but at the same time, anyone else can also come in and kill you. Right? You want to live it, you want to have security, that means you're going to be locked up in a cell somewhere where nobody can touch you. Okay? And that's going to be a miserable experience. Now, because we have become more free, but also less secure, more lonely, more isolated, there are certain ways that we can escape this feeling of loneliness, this isolation. So Fromm calls these things psychic escape mechanisms. There's 3 ways to escape the negative aspects of our increased freedom, the loneliness, the isolation, right? The insecurity. 3 ways we can do this, okay? And one is through authoritarianism. And authoritarianism, according to Fromm, takes 2 forms, masochistic or sadistic. You can be the masochistic type, right? Which means that basically, like you enjoy pain, basically. You believe that you're inferior. You have a strong need for dependence on another person, right? Or dependence on the group. You willingly submit to control of others or social forces to ease your loneliness. So when you're masochistic, you give in to authority. You're nothing, you're inferior. You follow what other people say. You believe what other people believe. You become a part of these groups that determine how you conduct yourself, what you believe. And you're masochistic. You are basically just a follower. And you will do what you're told. You will do what the group wants. And we have a lot of people like this, by the way. If you think about just politics, Republicans, Democrats, there's not too much of a middle ground there. Independents, there are some. But think about it. You're a bunch of people just believing what the group says, what the political party says. And they do anything to defend that position, to defend that power or that influence or whatever it is. And you see how we're at odds, we're fighting with each other because we willingly submit to these ideologies, these groups, and we follow and believe what they say. And if the other group says something, they're the other group. They're wrong, they must be wrong. And we believe the opposite. That's masochistic, okay? It's like you saying you're inferior, you know nothing, you're just gonna follow the group, okay? But that's one form of authoritarianism where you just submit, you give in, and you go along, so to speak, with others, whatever the others believe, whatever the group you ascribe to, okay? Or you can be sadistic, right? Where you're the one who wants to rule over other people. You strive for power over others. You want to make other people dependent on you. You control them, you exploit them. You want to cause pain and emotional suffering. So you're the type who basically wants to lead the group and have all the power and tell other people what to do. And there's plenty of people like that, right? I mean, think about the people who strive for power, even in our own culture, our own society, right? Who are they? They're mostly males. Males are the ones who basically got more testosterone and strive more for power, want to be in charge, okay? But there's some women too, and it's becoming a bit more inclusive, but there are those who want to lead, they want to rule, and that's what they are. And according to Fromm, this is another way to escape that freedom of isolation. You're becoming a part of something, right? If you're the inferior type or the one who's just going to follow, right, and obey, you're masochistic. If you're the one who's going to lead and be the one in power, right, then you're sadistic. But either way, it's authoritarianism. You're escaping your loneliness by becoming a part of something, by following something. That's masochistic, or by being the leader who has the followers. That's sadistic. That's authoritarianism. We also have other ways to escape it. You can also escape your feeling of isolation, loneliness, through destructiveness. Okay. That destructiveness is the desire to eliminate threatening persons or objects, to escape your own feeling of powerlessness by in the world by destroying it. So there are those that basically are easily threatened by things that they don't understand or things that are different, and they want to destroy them. They want to get rid of them. They use rationalizations like, you know, it's for love of country, it's for duty, for, you know, it's our conscience, right? We have to destroy evil, right? Patriotism. In reality, all they're trying to do, all they're doing, according to Fromm, is they're trying to get rid of those things they don't understand, those things that they don't like, those things that are different from them, right? They're basically trying to eliminate their insecurity, their feeling of powerlessness, their feeling of isolation, that threatening feeling, by trying to destroy those other things. Okay, and think about it. We've seen this, right? With Nazi Germany, we not only saw the authoritarianism and the, you know, the authoritarianism with the masochism with all the people who followed Hitler and did whatever he wanted, right? And then the people who were the sadists, who were the rulers and the leaders, but we also saw a lot of this, the destructiveness, where they tried to eliminate something that they saw was threatening. People who they saw were different. Things that they didn't understand or didn't want to believe in, they tried to destroy them. And we still have that today. We still have this today, of course. This is a way of escaping this loneliness, this insecurity. There are people who try to make themselves feel better by attacking those things that are different, by attacking those things they don't understand, or those things that are not a part of their group, that they want to destroy them and get rid of them. That's destructiveness. It's very evil, but that's one way of escaping that isolation, that loneliness. It's one way to make yourself feel better, is by trying to destroy those things that threaten you. And another thing, the most common thing I think that people do nowadays is to be an automaton. And basically, you're like a robot, a mindless robot. Not even a robot, more like a drone, but you do what you're told, basically. The automaton is the kind of person who eases their loneliness by becoming exactly like everybody else, by conforming to societal rules. The people who just follow the crowd, it's not the same thing as authoritarianism, okay? Here we're talking about just being like everybody else, right? You dress the same way, you believe the same thing, you talk the same way, you like the same music, eat the same kind of food. You're just like everybody else. You are the typical average person. And we have a lot of that, right? We follow fads and trends, right? Hey, everybody's on Facebook now, so you have to have that Facebook account, right? There's billions of people on Facebook, right? Think about the way you dress, the way you talk, what you like, what you eat. You're basically a product of society. You've been taught to be a certain way and believe a certain thing. You're an automaton. You're just like everybody else. Think about it, right? You know, you grow up, you know, you're born, you know, your parents teach you some things, you go to school, you learn other things. Eventually you get older and you get married, you have kids, you buy a house, you get a car, and hopefully you can retire, right? And you follow these rules, this order in which you do things. You're an automaton, you're just like everybody else. Guess what? You don't need to get married. You don't need to be like everybody. You don't need to have children. You don't even need to have a job if you don't want to. You can be a bum, okay? You don't need to be like everybody else. It's hard not to be like everybody else because we have certain rules and it works better when we follow those rules. But we're just being like everybody else. We're not really thinking for ourselves. It's gone to an extreme nowadays, right? Where people, when they buy homes in these communities, these tract homes. All the houses look the same. You know, and you don't even have any, you know, and they even have these homeowners association where they tell you what you can't do with your property, that you can't paint it. You have to maintain your lawn. They have all these rules, so to speak, and you follow these, and you're just like everybody else. And we're becoming indistinguishable from others. There's very few individuals. Most of us are just like everybody else, right? But you don't have to be that way. You don't have to be an automaton. But this is how we escape our feeling of isolation, our loneliness, our insecurity, right? Because we have too much freedom, and at the same time, we have become lonely and isolated and insecure. And this is how we try to cope with this. Let's keep going. Another thing that Fromm said is that the development of the individual parallels the development of the human species. So we see this as individuals. right? That infants are initially very secure and very dependent. When you're born as an infant, you're completely helpless, but you're very secure. You have your parents there to take care of you, and you're dependent on them. You have absolutely no freedom, but you have a lot of security. That's how you're born. As you get a little bit older, you become more independent. You start learning how to walk and how to talk and how to do some things for yourself. But as that happens, you become less secure. You can fall, you can get hurt, right? You know, as you start running around out there, you may get kidnapped, you may get hit by a car. So you have a little bit more freedom, but at the same time, you're less connected and less secure. You try to regain this security by using mechanisms similar to authoritarianism, destructiveness, and automaton, according to Fromm. Yeah, you know, you can run back to mommy and just do whatever mommy says. We'll talk about how it works in a moment, right? Or you can become destructive. We'll talk about that, right? Or become just like everybody else. Try to regain that security, right? Because it's scary to be independent, to be on your own. You're not on your own as a child, but as you gain more independence, more ability to move and think and wander around, you're also less secure, more likely to get hurt. The nature of the parent-child relationship determines the mechanism the child employs, according to Fromm. So what kind of relationship do you have with your mother? Specifically, it's the mother is more important. Okay. So there's three forms of relatedness, okay, between the mother and child. You can have that symbiotic kind of relationship with your mother, let's say, where children remain very close to and dependent on parents. Okay, it could be both parents, okay? Remain close to and dependent on parents. You can, you know, try to gain back that security by developing this symbiotic relationship, right? You're very close to your parents and dependent on them. You escape your loneliness, your insecurity, by becoming a part of somebody else, by swallowing or being swallowed. If you are masochistic, you will allow yourself to be swallowed. That is the child allowing him or herself to remain dependent. They deny their true self and they do what mommy says, what daddy says, what they ask. They allow their parents to basically rule over them and swallow them. Or the child might be sadistic and the child is the one that does the swallowing, where the parents surrender and submit to the child. The child becomes sadistic and rules over the parents. But this is that symbiotic kind of relationship that helps the child feel more secure. And it's the same thing, by the way, that we talked about that's happening with society. As we become, you know, more free, we become less secure, and then we do things like this that we already talked about, you know, by authoritarianism, right? By becoming masochistic or sadistic. It functions at a society level. So we talked about how it functions at a society level, but it also happens with development of the individual. We're born, like I said, helpless, right? But very secure because we have mommy and daddy. We have no freedom. And as we get a little bit older, we get a little bit more freedom, become less secure, more isolated. So this is the kind of relationship you might have. Where you have a symbiotic relationship, right? You depend on your parents, they depend on you, right? If the situation is masochistic, you as the child swallow your parents, you rule over them. I mean, your parents swallow you, they rule over you, and you deny yourself. Sadistic, you swallow your parents, right, and you rule over them. And there are children who are that way, where they're the ones in charge. Parents do whatever they want, okay? Or you can have the kind of relationship where it's withdrawal destructiveness, like destructiveness, right? Withdrawal destructiveness, where you attempt to regain your security by separating from your parents, right? So you try to be secure, basically, you know, by isolating yourself, separating yourself even more, so to speak. Here's the thing. Parents who act destructively, who subordinate and subjugate the child, who basically are too mean, too punishing, and too strict with the child, will cause the child to withdraw. The child will not feel secure and will withdraw, and then instead become destructive. When the child withdraws, the child will become destructive, will destroy things and throw things. And you can see that when that happens as teenagers, right? When children withdraw, they become destructive. They leave the home and they join gangs and delinquent groups and they break the law and they end up getting into a bunch of trouble. That's that withdrawal destructiveness pattern, right? Where children don't have real security at home, right? They don't really feel safe because the parents are really mean and they're very strict. Maybe they beat them, they abuse them, whatever it is. So the children don't feel safe, they don't feel secure, so they withdraw from that and become destructive. When they withdraw, they become destructive. Okay, it leads to a bunch of trouble. Okay, a bunch of breaking the law, basically. The way to really have a good relationship, right, is to have love. Okay, that's what you want, where the parents provide the child with respect and a balance between security and responsibility. And by the way, that's what we need as society as well. That's what Fromm is saying, right? We need a balance between security and responsibility. We need a balance between freedom and security. We need some freedom, but not total freedom, because then we're totally insecure and we're not safe. We shouldn't have total security either, because then we have no freedom. We need a balance. We need to find a way to balance this. And we're, trying to do this as a society. But this is called love, right? As a relationship, it's called love. With the parents and the child, find that balance, right? Where you're letting your children develop and grow and be free and gain independence and responsibility, right? But you also make them feel safe and secure. You protect them and guide them. You have to find that balance where you don't restrict them too much. You keep them safe, but you restrict them. You can keep your child very safe from everything, but that means they never get to see the world. You don't let them grow up. You don't let them date. And they have no freedom. If you give them too much freedom, what happens with children? They get into trouble. They have sex too early. They start doing drugs. They ruin their lives. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to run their own lives. They need some rules, some order. You need to balance, basically, the freedom versus security. You need to give them some freedom, but also some security, right? Where children have some responsibility for themselves, they have some freedom, but you also need to provide them with security, some guidance, some rules, some order. We need both. And if you balance it right, the child has little need to escape the growing freedom, right? They feel very little need to escape the growing freedom. So as they become more free, they don't necessarily feel that they have a need, that they need to escape that. They don't necessarily feel so insecure. They learn how to love themselves. They learn how to love others, right? You can balance, your independent individual needs, right? Freedom, right? And security, right? Security has to do with having rules and order and stuff like that, but also feeling protected. Let's keep going. Now, remember, we have a conflict between security and freedom, security and isolation, whatever you want to call it, right? This creates 6 basic human needs, according to Fromm. 6 basic human needs, things that we all need. Okay, one of these is relatedness. We all have a need to be related to others. Okay, we have a need to have contact with people, and this arises because of our separation from nature. According to Fromm, we become isolated from nature, so we're scared, we're vulnerable, so we need to cling to each other. We need to be related to each other. We need to form groups and form relationships so that we can provide ourselves with some security. We're stronger with others. Okay, we have a need for relatedness. We need to be with others. It's just the way it is. Okay, ideally, according to Fromm, it's through productive love. Productive love is when you care for others. You have responsibilities. Other people have responsibilities too. You respect others, right? You gain knowledge from others. You also provide knowledge. That's through productive love. And there's different forms of that. There's that sisterly, brotherly love, which is love towards someone of the same sex, where you help each other, your siblings, right? And you can have that sisterly, brotherly love also with friends, by the way, with your colleagues, with your neighbors, okay? It doesn't have to be someone who's genetically related to you. Erotic love is love towards someone of the opposite sex, a romantic relationship, right? That kind of love. You need to also care for each other, help each other, respect each other, right? And have your own responsibilities and, and help each other out, right? You share the responsibilities. And of course, there's parental love, right? Love toward the child, right? That's another kind, right? The love you have for your children. You need to guide them and protect them, but also let them grow up, right? But that's the need for relatedness. We all have this need. We need to be with others, okay? We can't help it. If we're totally isolated, we don't feel good. Not only are we vulnerable, but psychologically, we feel very bad. We feel depressed. We feel sad. We feel miserable. Another one is transcendence and rootedness. Other ones, right? Transcendence, according to Fromm, we also have a need to transcend things. We need to rise above the passive animal states. In other words, we should not just behave like animals. We need to transcend that. We need to also be creative and productive through children, objects, and ideas. We need to create things. We need to transcend the ordinary. We can't and should not just live like animals. Okay? We need to transcend that. We need to be transcendent. We shouldn't just eat, sleep, go to the bathroom and have sex. I mean, that's living like an animal. Okay? We need to create things. We create, things through children. Yes, we reproduce, but also objects, create things, right? Build things, right? Ideas, expand on knowledge. That is transcendence. We're rising beyond the ordinary, beyond the animal state. Okay, we're more than that. Destructiveness results if creativity is blocked. Think about that, right? If your creativity is blocked, or the things that you want to do, if that is blocked, you will become destructive according to Fromm, right? When you're not allowed to pursue your passion or to basically do the things you want to do. Let's say maybe you want to create art or music or whatever it is that you want to be creative through. If it's blocked, you'll become destructive. You'll use your energy for other things, and it could be for destructive things. I'll give you some examples, just some extreme examples though. How many musicians have you heard that have said that if it wasn't for my music, I'd probably be out there, I'd probably be on the streets, I'd be a bum, I'd be in a gang, probably be some criminal. This was my outlet, this was my way to build something, to achieve something. If I didn't have this, I would have nothing. Plenty of people like that, whether it's rappers or rockers or whatever it is. For a lot of them, without that path, without that creativity, without that success they've achieved, they would have been out there probably raising hell, or just causing problems. And that's the way we are in general. According to Fromm, we need to be creative. We need to produce things, right? We need to seek things and use our energy, to create things and produce things. If it's blocked, we're going to use that energy for things that are evil, things that are bad. We're going to become destructive. You need to let your children play. If you keep them locked up all day, guess what they're going to do? They're going to drive you nuts. Okay, they're going to get mad and frustrated. They're going to give you a hard time. It's like that dog. You keep them locked up inside the house, and after a while, that dog is going to start tearing up the apartment or the house. He wants to get out and do something. Same thing with people. We need to use that energy, this creativity, need to create things. If it's blocked, if it's hindered, we will become destructive and we'll lash out and we'll basically destroy things around us. We also have a need for rootedness. We need to establish new roots with family, community, society, right? We need to become a part of things, right? Develop families, but also develop roots in our community, be a part of our community, our society. And the more we do that, the better we feel. When I first moved to the Antelope Valley, I didn't really have any roots here, right? I didn't have any real family here, right? Didn't feel part of any community, any society. But now I have this job. I've been at it for a while. I feel that I'm a part of this community. That started with basically the college, because I'm respected here. I'm treated well. It's a good job, right? I have a lot of colleagues, people who are considered friends, people I know. And we have a sense of community, believe it or not, at the college, among the people who work here. More with some people than others, but there's a sense of community. And that makes you feel more rooted, right? Less likely to go and find another job, to go somewhere else because you become a part of the community. Well, you need to do a similar thing in society and become a part of it, so to speak. Help your society, become involved. I'm not talking about political stuff, okay? I think political stuff is just evil stuff, okay? We shouldn't have political parties. It's really ridiculous, okay? We shouldn't vote for parties. We should vote for individuals, okay? We should vote for ideas, okay? But become part of society. There are ways that you can help your society, by getting involved in volunteering or helping clean things up or helping do certain things. But you also do that with family. As I, came here, I already had a, girlfriend, kind of my fiance already when I moved here. Eventually we got married. We had a family. We bought a house, and we're more connected, right? Connected with family, community, and society. I will admit that with society, I'm not that involved, right? I'm really going out there and participating in this this drive or that drive and stuff like that. I do contribute to some causes, right? Like, for animal welfare and things that I get in the mail that they want, donate money for this cause or that cause. But being more involved, where you're actually a part of it and you go do something is more useful. I've tried to do that in the past, by the way, but it didn't always work out. Sometimes I felt like I was in the way, because most people volunteer and they do things when other people are doing. Like during the holidays, people have this need, like, oh, we should do good, right? The holidays are coming up. We should volunteer to make sure the homeless have a Thanksgiving or have a Christmas and things like that. And what actually happens during those times, they actually have too many volunteers, okay? And they need volunteers. They need help the whole year, okay? But most people, when people do get involved, they mostly get involved during this time, and they're reminded of these things. But we need to be more involved, and if we were more involved and we helped each other more, we wouldn't have all the bunch of problems that we have. That's rootedness, okay? We need to be more rooted. We also have a need for identity, okay? We have a need to know who we are. We need an awareness of our own unique abilities and talents, right? Our characteristics, right? We need to know who we are. It's best if we can develop our own unique talents, our own unique identity, right? Really know who we are, what we're about, what we believe, and all that stuff. We can also identify with a group. That is less healthy. That's conformity. That's becoming like an automaton where you're just basically like everybody else, right? You join some group, whether it's a Christian group or whether it's a political group or a religious group or whatever it is, and that becomes your identity. That is not as healthy. People who really define themselves by the groups that they belong to. Maybe they're, like I said, it could be a political group, it could be a religious group, or maybe they really identify with a certain brand. Hey, it's the BMW Owners Club or something like that, and they really love BMWs and they're all about that. Hey, you know what the group right now? Tesla, right? That's a group, right, with a very strong identity, and they have their community, and it's growing, by the way. But that is less healthy. It's best to have your own identity apart from others, where you know who you are, your own unique talents and abilities, your own identity, right? Your own beliefs, not just copying other people, okay? Not just joining groups. But we all need a sense of identity. We also need a frame of orientation, right? An object of devotion. Frame of orientation is like a philosophy of life, a thing that we believe in, right? Rules by which we live by, that's the frame of orientation. Object of devotion, we need something to devote ourselves to. It could be our job, our families, right? Or something else, some mission in life, something we believe in, right? This provides direction and meaning for ourselves, right? If we don't have an object of devotion, family, our work, or something that we're devoted to, then really we're wandering aimlessly, and we're really not accomplishing much. And we may even become destructive, okay? Like I said before, right? We need to devote our energy to something. We need an object of devotion. We need to have something we really believe in. For a lot of people, that's their family and their job, okay? But it could also be your community. It could be something else. It could be a mission, something you believe in, eradicating poverty or whatever it is. We need an object of devotion, something we really believe in. And we need excitation and stimulation. That's like the same thing. Basically, we need a stimulating environment to function at our best, right? We need to do different things every now and then. Every now and then, we need to go see a movie. Every now and then, we need to go to a party. We need to try something new, right? Go out to eat. That is stimulation. Don't resort to drugs, okay? But that's another way people provide themselves with stimulation. And it's harder during the situation that we have now, right? Where we shouldn't go out and be with all these people because we can spread the virus, so to speak, during this, pandemic and stuff. So it's harder to get that excitation and stimulation, because if you're following the rules, you're not going to all those parties. You're not going to all those places, right? Because you'll be in crowds and, you can spread it. You need to protect yourself and others. And I'm following the rules, and yeah, I'm lacking excitation and stimulation. I feel like, kind of cooped up in here, but we need that. We need that excitation, stimulation. We need to travel. We need to go places. We need to see new things and try new things and change it up every now and then. That's what that is. The next part has to do with Fromm's basic, personality types. And we'll save that for later, okay? So I'm going to stop recording.